Okay. I hope everything is perfect. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for everything. I'm going to connect with Julian right away. Here we are. I'm again apologize. We all apologize for this technical problems. If we were in a museum, we probably would have technical problems with microphones, and here we have technical problems with the net or with accounts. New reality. Okay, he's not here yet, but we'll be there. Not yet. Let's see. Lara, he's on Lara. He's on Lara Facco's account, so I need to see if Lara's here. Not yet. Okay, we'll try. We'll wait for him to connect with us at this point. So I was saying, what really amazed me was these diverse terms, and how two countries of the same in Europe, of course, have been defining, relating, and participating and reacting to this emergency. The different ways, different strategies, different value that one gives to culture and art in this specific case, in this situation. Julian, here. Maybe he's here. Julian, as you know, has worked on a very important piece called Manifesto, and it is one of the works that I have always most enjoyed. I've seen all of Julian's work, so I have to say I'm a big fan of his. Fan of his work. This multi-screen video featuring Cate Blanchett pays homage to the moving tradition and literary society, or literary beauty of 20th century manifestos. So he went through many manifestos, or the most important manifestos of the 20th century, written by artists. And here he is, and he developed this 13-channel video. In which he speaks about the idea of the manifesto and its political, social value itself. So Julian, he's here finally.
I'm here. I hope it stays this time. I'm very sorry, audience.
Hope it's... Okay. So I was just speaking about your work, Manifesto, and I just gave a little introduction to it, and finding it today more than ever contemporary, I'd say, very present in today's discourses, in a moment in which, this film couldn't be more necessary and contemporary today, in a moment in which desire and need for deep changes in society are at the forefront. Julian? I'm so sorry, this is so not working. I think we've lost him again. I will try to, once again, disconnect and reconnect. It's the only probably a possibility we have, unless you want a monologue by me, but I don't think you're all interested in my point of view on Julian. Okay, here we go. Here it is again. Trasmette in diretta. Yes, I think it is here. I see you finally.
Let's start from the beginning. This is our lucky moment.
Okay. So if everything stays still, let's begin from the beginning. Okay, so I gave some insight on your work to the audience in the meantime, speaking a little bit about manifesto, but I know that they prefer you speaking. So since I already introduced manifesto to them, I was interested in going back to this project. And if you want to kind of fill in some of the explanations. So my first question on manifesto regards your interest in going back to the research and development of the project itself. So you decided at a certain moment in time to concentrate on these manifestos of the 20th century, taking from them some essential points, which today are absolutely fundamental, essential, at the forefront, couldn't be more contemporary, I'd say. Could you tell us a little bit more about that type of research before me jumping to the next question?
All right, let's hope it works this time. Sorry again about all these technical problems. Well, Manifesto was started to become a project about 5 years ago. I had the feeling that it was worth looking back to the 20th century art history and see if all those beautiful manifestos have any meaning today, if they are maybe even applicable in a certain way. And so, as many of us artists, I had read a few of those manifestos while studying, but I was not really into it, I must admit. Reading them again was with this perspective on today's politics, especially on the rise of populism, was very interesting. And I thought it was worth a try. So the idea was to bring back these texts, or not bring them back, but bring them to our time and forget about the visual work of all these wonderful artists that had written these manifestos. So forgetting once about art history and also about the contextualization of the text, because we have always to remember that many of these texts were written when the artists were in their young 20s. And so often they were written before the actual physical work was even created, which makes them all the way more interesting, because we always, and especially art historians, see those texts as monuments of art history, which they haven't been for sure when they were written. So it's really interesting to look back at them and see them as a pure manifestation of poetry and a will to create and change the world. And so what I have done is that of course, I read hundreds of manifestos before I made a selection. And then out of those, I selected about 50 or 54 or whatever it was. And I found on a parallel research trip, like I was collecting ideas for characters that could deliver these monologues or this text as monologues in our contemporary society. So they kind of depict, the collection of characters depicts a kind of contemporary mosaic or kaleidoscope, if you want, so of our society, of all kinds of different social classes, professions, even gender. There's one man in it, 12 women, all performed by the actress Cate Blanchett, which try to see those characters more like vessels for ideas than really characters. So they're almost caricatures, if you want so. And all this recontextualization in our contemporary world, of course, had the only purpose of driving the viewer's attention to the pure essence of the text, if you want so, to poetry, because many of them are very, very beautifully written.
Yes.
And if you see them now in this context without knowing even who wrote that, that you can see later if you want to see the catalog or look on the wall index. But I wanted not to have the names of the authors within the picture. So if you look at them without the contextualization, I think they become extremely actual, although sometimes they derive from 100 years ago. And then later, when the installation was well premiered, and later on the film version, I traveled quite a lot with this work around the globe. And it was very satisfying for me to see the very different yet passionate reactions from the local audiences in very different social and social-political circumstances. So we showed, for instance, in the US just after Trump had been voted. We showed it in France before the Le Pen or Macron election. We showed it in Turkey after the referendum of Erdogan. We showed it in China. So I was it was very satisfying to me, and I guess it's a bit of a dream of all of us artists, that you kind of touch a point in society where the viewers don't talk about the art anymore. They see the art, but then they immediately start to refer to politics. And it was all about, all of a sudden, it was like the first questions already were about like freedom of speech and, populism, the danger of rise of populism, of being angry but having nothing to say, which is quite the opposite of what you feel in this manifestos, where there's a lot of anger as well, but a very kind of beautiful anger, an anger charged with creativity and ideas, and yeah. So
and
that,
a will to kind of, and rebirth, the kind of will to kind of develop.
right, and in this sense, I guess also in this very moment, I'm not sure. Well, actually, I show it in two museums, but they're both closed, of course, at the moment because of Corona, in Washington and in Jakarta. But I look forward to reactions, including even what's coming out of this COVID-19 crisis, as people like to call it. It's a very emotionalizing time, I think, also for us artists, because we have to cope with what's coming up, what's coming out of that as well. And I do think, it sounds almost like a conclusion, but I like to drop it here. I do think that artists will be very much needed in the coming times. We talk a lot about governments needing to support artists. I agree on that, of course. Me personally, I'm pretty well off, but I have lots of friends that are definitely needing financial and logistic support from governments. But I would also like to offer the opposite perspective on looking at artists helping governments in the future, and governments needing urgently the support of artists as thinkers and as people with creative potential, with ideas that might help to change a system which apparently fails to handle this crisis.
What you're saying is absolutely fundamental. This idea of collaboration and correspondence is fundamental, and it's absolutely probably what the future's perspective should be, or would ideally be like. What you said made me think about two things. One is, certainly I want to keep the discourse on populism afterwards, because I wanted to quote another work that you made that I'm very familiar with in Rome. But I wanted to go back to this idea of manifesto and the urgency of expressing an idea that also corresponds to a political, social, emotional urgency as well. So today, I was saying before, while the connection was going on and off, Lorenzo sent me an article, and I thank him for this, in which he says that, in which it said, not him, Lorenzo did not, but the article said that Angela Merkel dedicated a video message to the artists in Germany today, saying that they were fundamental for the country. You know that our Prime Minister, Conte, instead thinks that artists are entertaining for the country mainly. So there was a lot of debate on this in the past days, even in Italy, just really few days, the past week. So the situation in Germany and in Italy is very different, apparently, because certainly one of the categories that has been, will be, and has been already most hardly hit in this moment is the category of the artists,
yes,
of the cultural workers. Let's call them this way, because it's not only artists; it's everybody that works in the cultural system, and not only in the arts. I'm always thinking about all those cultural workers or workers of the film industry, for example, the theatrical industry. In Italy, of course, these categories are barely considered by the emergency measures.
Yes.
Today, people say things at their funds, but nothing has been actually really spoken about and said and signed off. So for the first time in this country, at least since decades, a group of art workers, naming themselves Art Workers Italy, has felt the need to develop a collective perspective in sharing these paradigmatic values of social and political values, and returning to writing a manifesto. This paradigmatic value of the manifesto becomes central again for the first time in ages. And it's, of course, what they want is what the AWI wants is for the government to recognize themselves as fundamental subjects in the local and global cultural activity. So I'm asking myself to you, because you're very knowledgeable and I value and treasure your point of view very, very much. I mean, which revolt and resistance strategy do you think are possible to implement in this historical moment?
This is a super big question, so it needs a long answer. Before I answer your question, I would like to state something, because you mentioned Angela Merkel. We here in Germany, I mean, I would say, like, among our friends, we're quite happy about the internal Germany internal information policy of Merkel and her government. I think she did quite a good job there. While on the other hand, I was very sad, and I'm happy to have the chance to express that sadness to an Italian audience, and also especially to an audience mainly listening or also listening in Bergamo at the moment. I was sad about the lack of symbolic gesture at the very beginning of the pandemic, when Italy was in deep trouble, and we were sitting on all this medical equipment here in Germany and not offering a symbolic gesture. I think that was a very sad and poor, big missed chance. And especially, I find it very sad. I would like to symbolically apologize for that, being a German. But I especially find it sad because, remember, just 5 months ago, we were all looking at England and talking about the strength of Europe and how we should all stay together, stick together, and be shoulder to shoulder as European countries against this one country wanting to drop out. And then the pandemic comes and everybody is just his own best friend. And I found that was a very... in a very sad way, also symbolic moment for the danger in which we're finding ourselves, and I think it was also dangerous looking at the future, because we need this very strong symbolic positive statements at the moment, because let's call it the mean side of the other side is constantly using symbolist actions, but in a very mean and perfid and bad way, and we have to understand the strategies and give a counterbalance to that. And I think that was a precious and missed moment in let's call it European recent history, where I wish that the stronger nations would have expressed, immediately offered help, immediately facilitated the idea of Eurobonds and so on, as a gesture against populism on the long perspective, because what we observe now worldwide is another kind of very dangerous development. We got used to hate speech, we got used to misinformation. Misinformation is quotidian now for half of the world's population, almost, at least now I'm talking about the Western world. Look at America. I look at countries like Brazil being governed by liars, let's call them like that, and criminals, if you want. So, and that's a very dangerous tendency, because we have now all this real virus called, misinformation and conspiracy theory, and that helps the extreme right enormously at the moment. I'm very scared that if we go through what is kind of waiting now for us, and we are right here at the core of your question, because you also referred to artists' economic situations. If we are through this first crisis, which is a humanitarian and a medical crisis, probably another one is awaiting us, which is a big economic crisis. And that is, of course, a very fertile ground again for extreme right-wing parties and populist parties and populists all over the world. And so we need that symbolism in the good sense. And now I'm coming back to your question, because I'm actually very much into this at the moment, asking myself, maybe triggered also or facilitated by my research for the Manifesto project. But I'm now working on a project which will also be based on existing text material, as many of my recent projects. And it's, in a way, it's a project on capitalist theory, or let's say on the history of human greed, looking back on 2,000 years of human history. While I focus, I want to avoid, or let's say it like that, I want to avoid lifting the didactic finger and saying capitalism is bad, because that's too easy to say. And we're all in it. We're all part of it. Even we in the art industry are part of this system. So I'm trying to focus on the euphoric aspect of capitalism, the one that kind of tames and silences us all and makes us all willing fulfillers of this system, which is successful. And as Slavoj Žižek said once, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. I think this is where we are at the moment, that we have just experienced in the last 100 years one alternative, and it failed, which was communism. And so none of us can really imagine any kind of alternative to capitalism. So I believe that the future steps, including for us artists, will be to invent a world which is changing capitalism, or let's say its worst expression, the liberal free market, from within the system, understanding it better, learning it, and not falling back to nostalgic attitudes of lifting pamphlets in the '68 generation, but really trying to work it out from inside. I don't know, the one strategy, for instance, is deriving from a group called the Accelerationists. I'm not saying it well in English. There's other concepts, but I guess one fundamental idea is we need to, let's call it, educate capitalism.
Yeah.
And you want to say something, or shall I continue?
No, continue.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Just listening to your ideas to your remarks on the Italian group forming right now, I think this is something to keep in mind, that it will not be successful if we just lift the pamphlet of critique, because critique is already completely absorbed by capitalism. It became part of the system. Critique is even wanted by capitalism, because once you have official critique and tolerated critique, the free market can just run off even more speedy than before. So I think we need new forms of thinking, risky thinking, and there I like to remember the brilliant thinking and poetic thinking of those artists in Manifesto. I think we need something which I would like to call a kind of poetic exaggerism, which derives from a wish to not make more art on the art market, but make pure art that really reopens perspectives on this world we are living in, and not only in the visual arts. I'm also talking about literature, music, and so on. I mentioned educate capitalism. What I mean with that is that we have now been told for so long time that everything is okay and the market is free, but it gives us freedom, and it's just an ongoing ritual of selling us something that is profoundly ethically wrong, as we can observe right now in this very moment, where a pandemic, which is basically a medical fact or a biological fact, ignores, first of all, who gets sick and who doesn't get sick. So you can say the virus really doesn't care about us, but the system itself doesn't ignore where you're from. It treats black people far worse than white people. It will treat poorer people far worse than us. So we are almost through it, you can say, but what's waiting in other countries will show that this world is completely out of balance, and the system we constructed or we orchestrated is completely dysfunctional. So when I say, and then I'm finished, when I say educate capitalism, I mean something as simple as when you have a birthday cake on a child's birthday and you have 12 hungry children, the mother cuts the cake and everybody knows I get one piece. Even the most hungry child would just get one piece, and everybody knows that. And now ask any kind of person on Wall Street, why wouldn't that apply for capitalism? Right. So what I want to say with that, for capital, what I want to say with that is I think we need a shift of values. So you're not better because you own more, and it's not great to earn more. You will be better, hopefully soon, because you do better stuff for the community. You're a real politician in the original sense of the word, not a populist, but somebody who really does well for the wider audience. And that's what I mean with educate capitalism.
Which I maybe you call it educate capitalism, which I think is absolutely a beautiful term, even poetic in a sense. But we can also define it as generative welfare in some sense. And I don't know if this is if it's a definition that is actually existent, but in Italian we say welfare generativo, which is something that generates. It's something that goes back to the community. Okay, so it's not only asking, it's not only wanting, it's not only producing, it's also giving back. And that probably should be ideally what the system, the art system should be looking at. Not only the art system, the cultural system in general, and art workers in specific. So thinking about giving back, and that's a part of education. Education is probably the first thing that one should be giving back or proposing in some cases. So I think that your ideas are fun, are absolutely precious, and are those that we should be professing and bringing forward. So thank you for this. Also, thank you for what you said before, because we were discussing these terms on Europe. With Wolfgang Tillmans 2 weeks ago, and it was a very important discussion on the present and future of Europe, and the past, present, and future perspectives on Europe, and so it was one of the debates that we've had during these Saturday Night Lives. So again, thank you for your opinion and your presence. That's a very beautiful statement that you made. Thank you.
Thank you. Wolfgang is absolutely great. He's very, very engaged, and I really appreciate what he does. We were both involved in a thing called Forum on European Culture last year, or was it 2 years ago, in Amsterdam. It's a great thing. You should look it up. Maybe you have been there, Ilaria.
I looked it up already, because it's on the rebranding of Europe.
Yes.
Also, kind of rethinking of Europe. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. I did my research. Yes. No, but I wanted to go back to what you just, because again, what you just said and what we were speaking about also with Tillmans at the beginning, during our conversation 2 weeks ago, but you reminded, and what your work is strongly about is, and what you mentioned is this return to populism. And again, I want to begin from a work of yours, because it's important to begin from works of art. In Italy, and precisely in Rome, last year, 2019, if I'm not, if I'm correct,
that's right.
You presented a new piece entitled, I know the title in English, I don't know if it has an English correspondence.
In English it would be
La parola è sempre. The word
l'avanguardia
is the
dell'azione.
of action.
Yeah, the world is always the vanguard of action.
La parola è sempre exactly. And it was in a monument, un monumento equestre, an equestrian a monument. So, which wasn't a film, but a performance that was inspired by the iconography of the equestrian monument, and which is very present in Rome, if we think about the Marco Aurelio, and the concept of authority that is associated with it. So in this case, you had 4 living horses that were running on Piazza Venezia, entered the stables of Palazzo Ruspoli, where the exhibition was being held in the Fondazione Mimmo, and they were wearing these saddle cloths on which some articles dealing with the concept of equality and dignity of the person that are present in the Italian Constitution, and they were embroidered on these saddle cloths. So these are values of Western civilization that we kind of take for granted, but which are threatened suddenly and put into question by these populist movements that all are very active and very present and are taking more and more power all around the world. So this work is still very present, at least in my mind and today, especially regarding the principle of authority that lies behind the metaphorical figure of the horse, and the Constitution as a term of politics. So would you change the articles, or would you that you embroidered on the on the horses today, or do you think this is still a very present work? Or and eventually, where would these horses that were running in Piazza Venezia, so the Capitol Hill, where the power was in Italy, where would they be running today eventually?
I think they would still be running where they were running. Actually, it was not only Piazza Venezia. We made them run in front of important government buildings, the Prime Minister's office and the President's office. Very early in the morning, it was a kind of illegal, non-authorized action. We thought we just asked for a filming permission as a tourist. A hired carabiniere that helped us to block the street when we needed it for a moment. The piece was originated or had its origin in my first movements in Rome when I was there for a year at Villa Massimo. And one of the very first things I did arriving in Italy, as I was highly irritated by the actual politics of the country, especially about Salvini, of course, I read the Italian constitution just out of curiosity, and I was very much touched by it. It's a beautiful constitution. It is a beautiful manifesto again, and it's quite advanced in relation to, or not quite advanced. It's really advanced. I think it's one of the most contemporary and modern constitutions of Europe as well. You don't find in the German constitutions, for instance, so clearly saying that women should be paid equally to men when they do the same job. Of course, it doesn't happen, not even in contemporary Italy, unfortunately, but at least it's written in the constitution. And many more, most of them, which I found interesting, were all addressing issues of protection of minorities, religious minorities, not only protection of minorities, but also the absolute job of the government to guarantee freedom of speech, but also freedom of religious expression, no matter if you are a Muslim or a Christ, whatever you are. All these things that, as we all know, are not only put into question, but are like profoundly endangered by populists. And so one thing came to the other. Palazzo Ruspoli, where the exhibition happened, is a former horse dormant. So I was running around in Rome, saw all these equestrian monuments, and then one came to the other, and I just invented that performance, which actually did lead also to a film, which was just added up later to the exhibition, yes, where you see the horses running through Rome. Yeah. And it's maybe nice to remember that, because we often don't think about it. When you see an equestrian stage show, keep in mind that the horse is always the people, and the rider is the government that leads, or the leader that leads the people. And allowing those four horses running riderless through Rome, which is... was of course a comment on politics, which I allowed myself as a German in Italy. Forgive me for that, but it was a moment where I had to do it to feel all right in Rome, and feel kind of be in the place to continue my work, which I brought to Rome.
And you said something very important, because the rider, in this case, it's the horse, and the authority of the horse itself as this metaphorical and symbolic presence. Yet, who's guiding us, and who's guiding the horse, and who's guiding us? I mean, at the same time, and this is just a comment I'm making, and then I'll go forward. But we, in these 2 months, all of us, in our different ways, in our different countries, in our different motions, we were guided by a political force that we had to kind of trust, because we were locked down in homes without being able to go out, and we needed a guide. We understood that we really needed to be guided. We were looking at this guide, but then, do we actually trust this guide? And how do we manage to kind of feel responsible as citizens if we have, or if we do have a guide in front of us, and or if we don't even trust that guide? So that's all these questions, I think, are things that have emerged. All these, what you're saying, you were also saying before, these comments on the present time, and how we were unable probably to deal with or feeling that's not even able, we're feeling victims almost of this situation. Okay. So I think that the idea of the guide is really important, what you just said before. I mean, and this idea of a guidance probably will need to change completely, because certainly we have a before and after of this pandemic, this crisis, this moment, which has changed and will change many things. And one of these things that has changed and will change is the way we look at art and make art. So your work, for example, has been presented in both the art context and the cinematic context. And what are your thoughts in relation to these new display strategies, for example, that have been pushed forward by art institutions, even the film industry, that we are now witnessing? We've all been navigating them and seeing works on them. Do you see your works on these platforms, or do you see yourself in relation to these platforms? Because it's also kind of a new democratic way of seeing things, or a non-democratic way of seeing things. It's also interesting to reflect on what is democracy and what is the free viewing idea and access to culture itself. What are your thoughts in regard to this?
So first of all, we have to see that the way art is shown today is often dictated by the art market. Restrictions or like trying to show a work not so often or not publicly has often to do with valorizing that work more, giving it more commercial value on the art market. I made a very strict decisions already, like I think 8 years ago or so, when I went online with my website, that I put all my work 24/7 live everywhere. You can see it on my website. And I might have lost a few collectors to that, but I think it was worth it, because I wanted exactly that. I wanted the kind of democratization of the accessibility of the work, because I do travel quite a lot. But even when I travel to countries where you don't expect a vivid contemporary art scene, you're always among the privileged. And if we have an advantage deriving from social media, from the access to the internet, it's that it doesn't matter from where you look, as long as you have access, you can actually reach everything. Now, we don't have to forget, of course, that you need a certain kind of privilege anyway, which is your education, to understand that there is something like an artist website or a museum, which is, even if it's free of charge, that you can visit on a Sunday afternoon, like in London. So there's still a social gap, or let's call it an educational gap, which I think is the main aim of, if we imagine a utopist, beautiful world, the aim should be that every single individual on this planet has equal access to equal quality education. And I think we would get rid of a lot of problems in a very fast time. Now I've lost the track. What I was talking about.
your the work. No. Your answer is perfectly in line with what my.
We were with the. Now remember, we were talking about digital the platforms.
The platforms, the digital
I must say that in the last weeks I got a little bit, not annoyed, but a little bit. No, I can't say annoyed, but I was a bit. I started to question, because of course you get approached by lots of museums. They need to satisfy their audience, and they ask you basically always the kind of same questions. To which degree has Corona or COVID changed your practice? What are you working on? Tell us a little bit about, show us your atelier, and so on. And while it's mostly, and that's a bit irritating about it, you feel a bit like you are, yes, you are encouraging maybe, and you're delivering some entertaining information, but you're also a little bit the clown, le guignol au cours du, je sais pas. So you are kind of given a job within the art structure as it is, And I would like to say I like this one, for instance, very much because we really talk with each other. So I think everybody watching us, no matter if she or he likes it or not, but at least has the chance to enter a little bit more profoundly in our cosmos. While this kind of what you see now everywhere, like 90 seconds, it shouldn't be longer because otherwise it doesn't fit Instagram anymore. Videos of the artists at work in the studio during COVID-19 rather is not really exciting me a lot.
Yeah, no, that certainly I agree with you. Yet, I have to say that a conversation like this, for example, which I mean, as you say, perhaps some conversations might have been a bit more superficial, might have had formats of certain type, but I took advantage of these
Oh
moments, these
yes, of
conversations.
this kind of conversation very much. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I listen to so many people that I wouldn't have had the chance to listen to live, and they reach, of course, a very broad audience. So certainly it should be, it's all an experimentation, of course, but it's one of those things that I found actually positive. Now, I'm interested in understanding how they will proceed and how they will develop, and how we will be experiencing instead, if we will need to experience with social distancing, different types of developing of art in this way. But we'll see. I think we'll be still. I mean, there's been so much speculation on these discourses that we don't even need to kind of continue speaking about them. We just need to witness them or develop ideas within them.
I must also say that
so I'm not.
I just wanted
Go
to
ahead.
add something. I must also say that it kind of, in a way, improved my art practice, my working, as I work a lot in teams when I do these projects. Actually, most of the year, I don't employ a big team. I'm alone. I have one assistant, but I'm mostly alone, either at home or at the studio. And then I have an assistant or two who organize stuff. But the actual team to produce the work, is just assembled for each and every project. So in the time that I'm normally preparing these projects, we would normally meet in groups or at the studio and discuss and so on, let's say with the set designer or the director of photography of a film and so on. And now, because that was not possible during the last weeks, I had a lot of these Zoom calls. And I found that very fascinating because you have such a clearly defined, very focused time. You also have sometimes some technical issues as we have.
Yeah.
So you have to really,
minutes.
to focus. You have to focus. You have to listen well. And I do, for instance, with a friend of mine for this project I just briefly mentioned, Euphoria, which I'm preparing. We do read a lot together on the computer. I've never thought that was interesting or possible, but it's actually amazing. When you are sharing a book together in this situation, you read a paragraph, then you discuss it, and so in a way, this force majeure has also created some a new workflow, which I find quite productive and interesting.
Absolutely. I think we took advantage of you so much. I mean, I continue, but I think it's absolutely necessary to close a little bit. I'm not going to ask you how this pandemic has been affecting your work and how it's influencing
I answered that.
and your future practices. Exactly, you already answered it within the lines. But no, what I was interested in asking you is something that, as an artist, I mean, all these images of these empty and imagery of these empty cities that we've seen over and over again, empty Rome, empty Berlin, empty New York, empty London, which actually kind of are stuck in our imagination. We've never seen something like that. As an artist, or with your imaginary, how has that struck you, if it has struck you in any way?
I see it as a metaphor for a big wiped out space. And now I'm not talking about a physical space, urbanistic space, but more like a space for ideas. And I do think that it offers you a great chance to fill it with new ideas and new utopias. So hopefully, not really utopias, but plans that could be realized for a time to come. So again, I would like to foster the idea of poetic exaggerism, maybe leading us somewhere one day, if you do this all together.
Okay, great. I think that's a beautiful question. Also, the metaphor is absolutely poignant and absolutely good. It's a refreshing start, as you say, which is absolutely necessary. There's the audience made a question. Critica Naturales asks you, did you read Dialektik der help me Aufklärung?
Dialektik der Aufklärung.
Exactly.
I must admit, not the whole book.
Have you read it? Huh? Sorry,
Did it sound?
Did
My statement sounded familiar to you? Now I can't answer him directly, or the person who asked that. But
well, no.
Maybe hold on. Maybe I'm gonna pick a book. Maybe he actually talks about. Let me see if I find it so quickly. No, I don't find it now. It's somewhere in the shelves. But there's a beautiful collection of a book on Slavoj Žižek's writing and thinking, which I think has parts of his question in the title. So you might find it out.
Good. Okay, so that's I hope Critica Naturale had the chance to listen to the answer. Thank you. I guess that I have to unfortunately stop the conversation because we went way over our time.
I know we lost some precious minutes at the beginning. Meanwhile, I found out what was the problem. The problem was that my two children downstairs were streaming a video, and it sucked all the energy from it. Because I was running downstairs.
I understand that. I understand. What I do when I have these Saturday Night Lives is that I put my children to bed at like 9 p.m. saying, okay, now good night.
Yeah, that doesn't work with my children.
I understand these problems.
That doesn't work.
Anyway, thank you, Julian. I'm just going to remind everybody, the spectators that have listened to us today, that I thank this evening for all the spectators that stayed with us, that Radio GAMeC is still supporting the city of Bergamo with a new fundraiser in support of the mutual aid fund set by the city of Bergamo to help families in conditions of fragility and economic difficulty to contribute to the reopening of all commercial and craft activities and to revive the tourism sector and the cultural sector. So please help Bergamo, and thank you, GAMeC, for this work, this job, and this position that you're taking. Thank you. Julian,
I also want to thank you very much, Ilaria. Thanks a lot, and thanks to Lorenzo and to the museum, to Bergamo, and to Italy for offering me this chance to talk to you tonight. And I think we just continue this with our friend back.
Yes. I mean, Julian, for me, it was great to see you. I hope to see you again in Rome. Once again, Rome misses you, as you know.
Time is Rome.
And yes. It's Rome. Well, it's reciprocal. As soon as hopefully things get quieter and better, we hope to I hope to continue this conversation live. Thank you for your time, and thank you everything. Okay,
thanks everybody.
Have a nice Saturday evening and a good weekend.
You too. Ciao.